Hello, Internet. As you can see, the phone is being held horizontally instead of vertically like I normally do these reviews. And I am in my pajamas lying in bed because I was starting to get ready for bed when I realized, oh yeah, I was going to record this video after my workout and completely forgot. And since I'm not going to have time to record and post this tomorrow, welcome to the first episode of these bedside book reviews, where I give you my thoughts on a book I recently finished while lying in my bed struggling to stay awake before I completely fall asleep. So if you're seeing this video, I was able to complete the review before completely zonking out. Now, the book that I'm talking about tonight is Mrs. Sherlock Holmes, written by Brad Ricca. And I'll simply say this: it's a book that has potential that is completely undone by its presentation. If you were to look at the cover and the back blurb of it, it makes you think that this is going to be a narrative biography about an interesting historical figure, in this case, a lawyer who became the first female district attorney who was appointed before women even had the right to vote. And I thought that was actually a pretty interesting idea. And since I've been trying to read some more nonfiction, I figured, okay, what the heck, I'll check this out. Bought this a few years ago at a sale at Barnes& and Noble. I've only just gotten now to around to reading it and finishing it. And it's frustrating because I really wanted to like this book. It sounded like a really interesting idea, and it even starts out with an interesting premise where the prologue of the book shows a meeting between William J. Burns, a famous New York detective, meeting Sir Arthur Conan Doyle when he was visiting New York. And it kind of sets this idea about how a lot of people's understandings of detective work is shaped more by fiction rather than by the actual reality of it, and how a figure like William Burns kind of took advantage of that to make himself famous. And so I thought, oh, this is going to be kind of an interesting little critique of the true crime industry, and this is going to be an interesting look at what the media was saying about this figure versus the actual facts of the case. But then the majority of the book, while its premise claims to be about Grace Humiston, the first U.S. District Attorney, the first female U.S. District Attorney, rather, the majority of the book is focused on the disappearance of 18-year-old Ruth Kruger, who went missing in 1917. And it literally does the annoying in medias res thing where it, like, starts in the middle of the investigation, then it goes back to the beginning of the case and not, the beginning of the story of our alleged main character. So much of this book focuses on this one particular case. And what also doesn't help is that it tells much of its story out of order, where it progresses through the Ruth Kruger investigation chronologically, but then you just have these interruptions where it constantly keeps going back in time, back and forth, to different cases that Grace Humiston had taken on throughout her career, leading up to her appointment as a district attorney, and then through the investigation. And as a result, it feels very unfocused. And it feels a bit at odds with itself because it's focusing so much on this Ruth Kruger case, building it up as this big, important case, when some of these earlier cases that are in these vignettes sound a lot more interesting than what we're presented with. The book hinges everything on the Ruth Kruger case, but then it completely glosses over stuff like the Charles Steedlow case, which was a case where Grace Humiston, who at that time was under her first marriage name, Grace Quackenboss, and this was a guy who was on death row, had already been sentenced to hang, and so you have this case of this attorney like finding new evidence and basically trying to get this death sentence overturned because of a bunch of new evidence. And I'm like, why isn't the book about this case or some of these other cases, like her very first case of another woman who was sentenced to death but later was able to get the conviction overturned when it became clear that law enforcement dropped the ball. And that goes to another thing where the book kind of focuses a little bit on the media hysteria surrounding missing persons cases, and even focuses on some of the police apathy regarding missing persons cases, but these are so underdeveloped in the book as is presented, which is also a bit frustrating. I mean, it would be one thing if the book focused solely on the Ruth Kruger case, solely on, okay, here's this case, this missing persons case, here's how missing persons cases were handled during the early 1910s versus how they're handled now. That is a story in and of itself. But the way the book is presented here, it just feels unfocused. It's not really sure what story it's wanting to tell and how it's wanting to tell it. And it also doesn't help that a lot of the details from Humiston's early life are literally at the end of the book. It tries to have a lot of these weird, shocking twists that are like these weird developments in her life that pop up, but they feel like they come right out of nowhere. And it's not until you get to the end of the book of, oh, well, here's where she grew up. Here's how she was born. Here are the details about her first and second marriages. And I'm just like, why did you not have this, earlier in the book? Now, I'm willing to give Ricca the benefit of the doubt here. A lot of the information pertaining to Grace Humiston is very sparse, largely because law enforcement at the time didn't really see the need to preserve court cases and investigative documents beyond what I assume would be a statute of limitations, as literally they ended up literally getting rid of a bunch of documents. And so I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt that he was working with what he was able to find. But even setting aside the limited resources of the historical details he was putting together, and even setting aside the possibility of editorial interference, honestly, Ricca really needed to sit down and decide, okay, am I telling the story of Grace Humiston or am I telling the story of the Ruth Kruger case, and really just narrow the focus to one or the other? Either focus solely on the Ruth Kruger case, have Grace Humiston be just part of a larger ensemble of characters, which is essentially what the book already does, or tell the story of Grace Humiston in chronological order and chart her rise and fall. He really needed to pick one or the other. And honestly, if this book was simply called something like The Disappearance of Ruth Kruger instead of Miss Sherlock Holmes, it probably wouldn't be nearly as frustrating to read. Do I recommend this book? Not really. Like, if you're able to rent from a library out of curiosity, or if you see it on sale for like maybe 15 bucks, maybe. I paid about 17 bucks for this. So it's not like I lost a whole lot of money, but I wouldn't really recommend this book. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on Miss Sherlock Holmes. And yeah, I still don't really know how to end these things, so I should probably go to bed. I don't know if I'm going to keep this series going. So, yeah,